Hi everyone. So this is our short slide set on emerging adulthood to round out our Module 5 section on children and teens and emerging adults and their healthy technology use. So as a reminder, so as you can see here with our beginning slide, our interest with anybody is related to their human development, and this is what we want for the child, for the individual, with regard to their cognition and learning, their physical development, their socio-emotional development, and their psychological development. And that's normative, again, across everyone, universal, and yet we're all unique in the way that we developed. And so our aim for every human being is that we are healthy and that we develop normatively and according to expectations. And then with regard to technology, we then observe how somebody is using technology, and that then relates to, does that benefit our development, or in some way might it stand in the way and challenge our development? And as a result of that, our research and our observation and our testing relates to recommendations for continued use, which then goes back up to the top with my arrow that doesn't have a header on it, back up to related to our developmental expectations. What do we recommend? So from starting with what we want, what we observe, what our concerns are, what the benefits are, then what does research tell us that we can continue to recommend? And as I mentioned before, my recommendations for you for studying these we have 4 age groups and we've got 4 domains. So would be to do a little bit of a cheat sheet for yourself and to consider the 4 different age groups, and then what are some of our expectations for their physical, their cognitive and learning development, their social psychological development, and then generally any tips about our observations, or any of our major considerations with regard to their technology use. So again, just a cheat sheet for your own study. And then more specifically related to these 4 domain areas or 4 age group areas would be to consider what are our developmental expectations, and again, just little bullet points so we're clear on the difference of early childhood to middle childhood to adolescence to emerging adulthood, and then what very generally might we see with observed technology use. This could be middle school, middle childhood kids in elementary school that are getting tablets to do in-class activity or to take home. And adolescents' use of social media and for social connectedness. And then we might note the technology benefits or concerns, so that teenager is using technology for social connectedness, and the benefit is that it boosts their socialization. The concern is the potential threat of, say, cyberbullying, and what are our recommendations around safe and healthy use. So again, just some little documents, some little cheat sheets for you to fill out for your own studying. And then again, just as a refresher, we've been talking in the class about general types of impacts when we're thinking about technology use. And I've given you the acronym of TIDE, 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 edit, diet, whatever it is that can help you remember. But our impact areas are E for exposure. So how does, say, children's exposure to violent images, to the potential for the loss of privacy, for the potential interaction with perverts online. On the other hand, exposure to positive images, the exposure to their grandparents that they wouldn't be able to connect with otherwise. The impact of interactive activity, so that's the I. So how might learning be impacted from having, say, rote memorization on learning letters, Or how might learning be impacted by too early of an interaction of, say, a baby with blue screen before they go to sleep? And then the D would be the impact of displacement. So how might we especially be concerned if, say, I'm on the screen all day long, I'm in quarantine, I'm in social isolation, and I'm on my computer 20 hours a day, right? So, and if I'm on my computer and I'm not moving, what does that mean to my own physical activity? Or what does the displacement, if I'm on my phone all the time, mean to interrupting my relationships? So again, E for exposure, I for interactive activity, and D for displacement. So then we were looking at, and again, our picture of Daniel Radcliffe over time, from being a young child, a child in middle childhood, a kid in adolescence, pouty teen that he is, and then as a young adult. And I'll move over a little bit. And again, we are looking at specific developmental aims, that learning is, that development is universal, but then we're specifically interested too in how development varies depending on context, or the nature part of things, with different influences from interactions with parents, from specific interactions with teens at school, and then wider influences, say from the government, from culture, that sort of thing. And then a parent's role, and again, as we look forward into Module 7 with parent-child interaction, and Module 6, which is parents' use of technology, parents' own role in keeping their children safe, right? And that balance, that delicate balance of monitoring, of mentoring, of mediating their children's use, rather than imposing such extreme restrictions that it thwarts children's development. So, so when we're thinking about emerging adulthood, as we've been looking at, say, with teens, we look at pros and cons. And so with teens, we were looking at, in terms of brain, behavior, mental health, lifestyle impacts for social, psychological, and learning, and possibly some negative impacts of multitasking, where we believe that we can watch TV, we can watch our monitor, we can listen to a lecture, we can take notes. We can also be distracted by, say, answering email or a text from our friends. Like, can we do all of those things? Absolutely. But the question would be, how well can we do those things individually? We've looked at pros and cons in terms of use, in terms of learning in schools, the cons in terms of distraction to learning. And again, we can map these on not only in school-age kids and in adolescents, but further on when you're thinking of yourselves, for instance, in a classroom, and what technology might mean to support your learning, but also how it might get in the way. And if you think about way to the beginning of our class and our debate about the use of laptops in the classroom, then, a lot of this will ring true. And we have our recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And again, these are very broadly applied to children in elementary age on up through teens. And the use of the American Academy of Pediatric Family Media Plan for guidelines, collective guidelines that parents and their children or teens can do together to identify what is a healthy way for children to spend time with their screens. Now we enter into emerging adulthood. And this is where you all are now. And this is a very interesting stage of development that has been really, I would say, expanded in the way that we study this age period over the last probably 20 to 30 years. There used to be this sort of break off, and here, if you see in this graph in C, where we would be studying adolescence to about age 18, and then, after about age 18, then we would be studying adulthood. Well, over the years, there's been so much interest in this kind of fuzzy time period of well, we're talking about 16, 17, 18, but then is a 19 really an adult? Is a 20-year-old an adult? Like, how do we measure adulthood anyway? And so you can see these different configurations. Like, are we looking at adolescence ending at a particular age and then adulthood beginning? Is there some sort of a transition? Of course, that would make sense because development, even though we measure it in ages and by domains, it isn't clear cut, right? And, my example of, say, a 12-year-old boy who might be advanced physically, he might be less advanced emotionally, and he may have more of the emotional development of, say, a 10-year-old, and that's just who he is at that time, right? And so generally we don't have these really terribly discrete cutoffs of, adolescence ends and adulthood begins, unless you step away from the developmental literature and then you're looking at society, and society identifying at what age can somebody drive a car, at what age can somebody buy alcohol, at what age can somebody vote. It's at that point then that whoever the governing body is who is setting the age groups, right, will debate in terms of what is appropriate, right? What is an appropriate age for these things, for buying booze, for driving a car, for voting, for getting married, whatever. And so there's the developmental, sort of a developmental definition of adulthood. And then there is also maybe more of our cultural identification of what adulthood might be. You may have an idea yourself, maybe within your culture. You may have certain definitions of now you are a man, now you are a woman, right? And then we have our sort of legal, social policy definitions of what adulthood is. But we've been really, really interested in this migration from, say, 12 to 18 to 18 and beyond. And kind of this idea here is, kind of where we're merging now is this idea that there's a 12 to 18 and these developmental changes that happen in adulthood. And then there's this time period before, maybe developmentally, before society recognizes us as adults with full responsibility, but sort of this middle time of emerging adulthood and then adulthood, or perhaps even more appropriately, this slight overlap of, and I know you probably know yourselves, friends who are in this emerging adulthood category of, say, 18 to 25 years, but act pretty juvenile. Or maybe those of you who are within this age span and are incredibly responsible, incredibly mature. You pay your taxes, you pay your way through school, maybe you have children, you're caring for elders, and you are fulfilling these responsibilities of adulthood that life has conferred. So, they're, again, not discrete, probably some overlap. But again, just a very, very interesting area that there has been just a huge boom of research on, and pulling away again from, say, a Society for Research on Adolescence to a Society for Research on Emerging Adulthood. And the differences of what's going on, again, with brain development, with socialization, with identity development in these age periods. So one of our definitions, I would say, in emerging adulthood is what is adulthood, and oftentimes folks will sort of define that as having the full responsibilities of adulthood. And there is no one answer on what full responsibilities might be. I would encourage you to consider it for yourself, what full responsibilities might mean. And then we step back and we think about, for those responsibilities, what are the contexts that individuals are in that help them develop the capacities to fulfill those responsibilities? So this emerging adulthood sort of psychological profile, again, if we're stepping back and we're thinking about developmental differences, we can see here characterized by a true focus on one's identity, right? Is having a greater understanding of oneself past, say, high school, and before or as we are developing ourselves as an adult and sort of launching ourselves into adult responsibilities. What is our identity? What is our sense of ourselves separate from our families, and what possibilities are we exploring? Many emerging adults feel in between. Because they don't have, they're still in, say, if you're still in college or you're deciding when you want to get married, when you want to have children, what that first job is, where you want to live, that some feelings of instability perhaps as you are trying on different jobs, you're trying on different relationships. The sense of a deadline, perhaps, of at age 30, I need to be there, I need to be ready. And so some of these characterizations very much of a focus psychologically on a sense of identity, the exploration of possibilities, feeling ambiguous, feeling ambivalent, feeling unstable while still figuring all of this out, and possibly with a great sense of responsibility. And then there's this idea with parents and families in terms of launching. And so if there is this sense of ambiguity and sort of in between, then you know, when you're there yet, this idea of developing or launching from sort of a full association with the family to being fully launched and self-sufficient, you know, on your own. Psychologically, launching results in a healthy, individuated self. And so individuation here is the sense of oneself as separate and unique. It is this process of balance, the process of balance in connectedness and separateness that is healthy then in each family. And so very often one of those developmental processes that occurs during emerging adulthood is that sense of feeling separate and, again, individuated from the family, and yet feeling connected to the family. So that balance that by connecting with the family, if you're in your 20s and you're connecting with your family, you are not overly consumed by your family. And yet if you are connecting to your family, it doesn't mean that it stands in the way of your healthy individuation. The little graph that I have over here from USA Today, what's most important for you to think of becoming an adult, again, accepting responsibility for yourself. Financial independence is huge. Finishing your education, being able to make independent decisions, say around, again, housing, career, location, whatever. And this is very telling, the very small percentage that would indicate adulthood in terms of conferring relationship status, that I am not an adult until I am married. And so it is with this idea of what is healthy development in emerging adulthood, amidst all of this sense of identity and individuation, this search for developing full responsibilities, this sense for a healthy individuated sense of oneself, and yet maintaining a sense of connectedness with family and with friends. We're not completely, isolated from each other, that we have to ask then, what role might technology play? And so what I'd like you to do, there's a reading by Sarah Coyne and colleagues for your reading this for this module. There is also several links that I have for you. These are not required, but you can review them if you would like, by Jeffrey Arnett and others that describe emerging adulthood. And what I'd like you to do with your in your discussion groups is to just verify with each other again, what are the developmental aspects of emerging adulthood? What would we label as being healthy development in adulthood? What are our interests and our concerns? And then there's a Google Doc that all of the groups will add to. And what I would be interested in your doing is going to that Google Doc, identifying for your group and the group members who are contributing to the doc, what your recommendations would be. If the American Academy of Pediatrics has provided recommendations for little tiny kids, for kids 0 to 5, and they've provided recommendations for the healthy use for children and for teens, but what we don't have is a list of recommendations for healthy use for emerging adults. And so what I'd like you to do is to go to the Google Docs. So if you go onto Canvas, this is what it looks like. And there is the discussion. You can click there for discussion, and you can click here for the Google Doc. This will be open from the 18th, so Wednesday, until the following, what is that, Monday? And if you go to the discussion, this is what it looks like. There are just 2 questions for you to talk about with your groups. One is, how would we characterize healthy development of emerging adults with regard to cognitive, psychological, physical, and social growth? And then the second is, with regard to technology use, what guidelines would your group propose? And when you go to the Google Doc, this is what it looks like. And you can see the 9 group numbers, and simply write in your recommendations. If you, and hopefully by the time we're done, we'll have a really nice list that we can adapt and share with the full class. And then what I'd like you to do too is, as you're providing the recommendations, like, what's the justification? So if you're talking about limiting screen time to 5 hours a day, well, why? What does that have to do with, does it have anything to do with physical development? Maybe it does. Maybe our recommendation for limited screen time has to do with having more time for physical activity. And it certainly is in any emerging adult's physical health and development to spend more time exercising. To be fit, to keep our heart strong, things like that. So what is the justification? And then this is where you would include the group members' names. So that's what that table looks like. And again, back to the discussion. And so I would ask that starting on Wednesday, that your groups do the short discussion and add to the document. And this will count for activity credit in the class. So so that's your sort of reward for this. But it's also really good for your learning, and I guarantee you it will help in your studying for the next exam. So with that, I will bring our session to a close, and thank you all very much for your time, and look forward to the next little slide set overview, which will be on how parents use technology.